Here in the Northern Hemisphere, we've begun that transition into autumn, the time where the trees turn, the light wanes, and we begin that tip into the corner of the year known as the West. Each of the four cardinal directions has their own innate power and essence, and when we align ourselves fully with the season and the direction that season is pointing towards, then we can really experience so much healing. But there's something pretty alluring about the West in particular. I'm Asia Suler of One Willow Apothecaries, and this is your guide to harnessing the medicine of the West. Different traditions and cultures have varying views or ways of seeing the West. In Chinese Buddhism, the movement towards the West was considered to be tantamount to the movement towards enlightenment. For the ancient Celts, the West was where the other world lived. For ancient Egyptians, the West was the portal into the afterlife. And when we look at a lot of contemporary American literature around the West is really this place of freedom, adventure, and potential. So if we look at all of these interpretations, which is just a small smattering of the ways in which many different cultures view the West, we see that there's some general themes and categories that come up when we think about this specific direction. Because the West is the place where the sun sets, it holds a very particular place in our imagination, and you can imagine a lot of the associations that spin out from here. Autumn, as a time of the year when literally the sun sets on the growing season, is associated with this direction of the West. So there's certain themes in particular that come up for the West. Let's explore a few of those. The first one that comes to mind to me is this idea of freedom through letting go, or the way beyond death. So in autumn, particularly in the Northern Hemisphere, life dies back. The trees begin to lose their leaves, the plants return to the roots, and there is this feeling of freedom as the earth begins to let go of its finery. So for us, there's often this invitation to let go of the things you've been carrying, perhaps even let go of the things you've been growing. It's time to simply release it and rest. This way of thinking, the West was often associated with this idea of the way beyond death, that even though the world around us is dying or the sun is going down, that life continues, and there actually is this life after death. So personally, it's this idea of seeing the deaths in your life and then understanding that there is life that's actually coming out of that experience of death. And autumn is all about embracing this. Tantamount to this is the idea of reaping the harvest. So traditionally, this is the time of the year in which all the harvesting happens. You've grown many different plants, foods, grains for storage, and this is when you would harvest them and put the gardens to rest. So on a metaphoric level, it's a beautiful time of the year to ask yourself, what is ready to be harvested? What have I worked on that's really ready to be put in fruition, or maybe to put on a shelf to put in storage for later? It's also taking account of what connections you have, what is ready to die, and what is ready to transform. I'm going to tell you, when I look back on my life and my history and relationships, I've ended more partnerships in the fall than any other time of the year. And I think it's because of the special energies here. It's this impetus to really look at what is going on in your life and make a decision. Is it time to continue this on, or has this reached the end of this particular life path? This process of understanding what's working for you and what isn't is an important step in preparing to enter the womb of winter. In winter is when we get very, very quiet. It's the time of the year known for communicating with the ancestors, really going deep into internal reflection and self-awareness. So the West and autumn is this time of preparing to enter that womb, almost as if we're preparing to be in gestation to birth a new life. So Imagine you're at the end of your life and you're doing a bit of a life review. Only in this instance, you're doing a life review of your past year and maybe where you are so far in your life. So doing this review, you're actually preparing the way for yourself to go into this cocoon of winter and re-emerge again in the spring. In Celtic lore, the West is also associated with this idea of journeying or vision seeking, going on this odyssey and becoming the seer and the seeker. It has a very mystical quality to it. Oftentimes we think about this Western journey as the journey of knowledge, of esoteric awareness, of really seeking out one's destiny, one's life path. You could say that this is the area of the wheel of the year in which the hero or the heroine's journey lives. So this might be a time of the year in which you feel called to physically journey, whether that's making a weekend pilgrimage to your favorite place in nature or planning something a little bit longer. Ultimately, if we look at the mythology surrounding this time of the year and this direction in particular, the journeying is mostly about this inner seeking and this idea of journeying to connect with the invisible world. It's no coincidence that this time of the year was revered in many cultures as a time in which we could communicate with the ancestors, and the veils between the world became thin, whether we're looking at Day of the Dead celebration, Samhain, or other similar celebrations throughout the world. In the West, we explore this idea of scholarship through inner knowledge and other forms of knowing. Now, for those of us on a typical school year schedule, this is when school starts again. So it makes sense that this time of the year would be associated with scholasticism, study, and learning. But what I want to pass on here is not simply the idea that this is a time to get back to your book learning, but it's a time to really let your thirst for knowledge bring you into these deeper practices of self-awareness and self-seeking. The first thing I would say is to ask yourself this question: what do I want my life to look like? Because you're on this interesting tip right now of letting go, letting things die, taking stock of where you are and where you want to be, it's an important time for visioning. So I recommend asking yourself this question and actually writing it down in a journal. You can write down a little perspective of where you've been, but focus on what ideally you would like for your existence to look and feel like. Get as tactile as you can with this. The West is often associated with dreaming or the dream time, so this is a very creative space. It's a very liminal time, not summer, not winter. It's a time in which we can dream into what is to come. Without spring here yet, without the details in place, we can still, in the dream time, shift around these pieces of our life. So really ask yourself and get clear in this time. What do I want my life to look like? The next thing I would suggest is to create some sort of ritual of letting go. It's a truth here on our planet that death is what feeds life. And in order for new life to come in on the tail end of winter, when spring arrives again, we need to let go. It's important to create that space in order to be able to drop into the newness that wants to come. So there's many different ways to create some sort of ritual of letting go. Fire is a wonderful way to do this. Writing things down on a slip of paper and burning them in a small bowl, or maybe creating a bonfire outside. I also really like the practice of building what I call burial mounds or death mounds. So one of the cool things about living in the Northern Hemisphere is that when the trees start to turn, we have a whole big beautiful pile of leaves to work with, and we can use this symbolically. In many different areas around the world, tombs, pyramids, earth mounds were created specifically for people to go in to reenact this death and rebirth process. So you can do this yourself with piles of leaves. I recommend creating your own little death mound in a pile of leaves and then setting an intention. When you go into that pile of leaves, what will you be letting go of? This is a really safe way to work with this practice, and really fun too. So make this intention, get into the pile of leaves, cover yourself up, and then really imagine what you're letting go of being composted into the soil here. And then reenact your own rebirth. Pop out of the pile of leaves. Have fun with it. You can also do this metaphorically without getting in specifically, but decide to actually bury something that represents what you're letting go of in this mound of leaves, and then leave them and watch how the leaves turn into compost and the thing that you left behind dissolves into the soil and all that is. The last thing I would recommend is reach out for help. Specifically, ask for counsel from what I would call the invisible world or the other world. As I mentioned, this time of the year is a rich one for connecting to the other world, aspects of life that are just beyond our perception. So this is an important time to reach out and ask for support in that way. Believe me, there is so much support for you in the unseen realm. We just have to ask. So you could do this by creating a fairy altar. I go into the practice of working with elementals in another video here on my channel if you're interested. You could also try doing a shamanic journey. Shamanic journeys have a strong resonance with this season. And if you're unsure what that means or what shamanism is, you can check out another video on my channel called Shamanism as a Universal Gateway. This is also a rich time to be doing any kind of journaling work, to be tapping into this moment of self-reflection. I also find that there are several herbs that are really helpful in making this connection to the invisible world or the other world. If you're interested in learning some about these herbs and having a bit of a guided gateway into making these connections, you can check out my class, Herbs for the Other World. This online class is a portal into the unique medicine of autumn. We look at many different herbs that can help you make the connection to this time and really develop rituals that make sense for you in making these profound interrelationships between yourself and the patterns of the world around you. So if you like this video, share it with your friends, pass it on to the other seekers in your life. And if you try out any of these tips, tools, or techniques, let me know how it goes for you. I'd be really interested to see if these practices help enrich your experience of this beautiful autumn time.